This talk is an autopsy of a failed Agile project. Actually, it's an autopsy of about 3 separate failed Agile projects. The subtitle to this is Death of 1,000 Cuts, because that's how a project dies. There is no murder weapon. There is no gun, smoking gun beside the corpse saying that's what killed the project, or very rarely anyway. What it is systemic, ongoing failure. Failure in project governance, failure throughout the entire thing. So, what I'd like to do first is just point out one thing. Hands up who here uses Twitter. Excellent. Who here is using Twitter in this conference? Lovely. If you prefix your tweets with @Leybourn, or at least put it somewhere in the tweet, it will appear at the bottom of the slides. I will try and use that as a reference to make sure that I'm on topic, okay? So feel free to tweet away. So, a little bit about who I am and why I'm here talking to you. So first of all, my background, once long ago, was a software developer. All right? Web-based systems, PHP, Python, lots of fun. My passion out of that is open source, so I actually do a lot of stuff in the open source community. But I haven't done that for a number of years. From there, I moved into project management. And I'm talking Prince 2, traditional waterfall project management, which, from my experience, didn't work particularly well. From there, I discovered Scrum. Now, from there, I discovered that Agile is a lot more than Scrum. Scrum doesn't work alone. Discovered test-driven development, discovered XP, discovered feature-driven design, discovered DSDM, RUP. So, kept working in that space. From there, I started teaching. I still actually run training courses in Agile, and I do Agile coaching, available for hire if anyone is interested. From there, I actually became a senior executive in a number of organizations, director level and VP level and P level in the Australian government and a few private sector organizations, which was great fun. You get lots of authority, you get to do lots of interesting things, and from there I learned a lot about how business operates, how executives think about projects, which is actually part of what we're going to talk about today in terms of failure, because a lot of the failure in a project is actually from the executive. So now I'm doing consulting, primarily, Agile governance and Agile business intelligence in a large part. So, let's introduce our victim. Our victim, Mr. A project, okay, died. The one I've got at the moment was started in about 2010, lasted for about 9 months. Cause of death, as with all things, systemic failure. Okay? All projects fail. Let's introduce our little person. And I've just realized one thing, that I've turned wireless off on my laptop, so that's not going to update. So I'm actually going to get rid of it. I apologize. The wireless here has been very sporadic at best. There we go. So, here's our victim. Okay, Mr. A project. I'm going to focus on 5 different causes of failure. Okay, we're going to look at the customer. We're going to look at planning or iteration 0, sprint 0. We're going to look at the team, so the team as a cause of failure. We're going to look at infrastructure, the supporting infrastructure of the project, and your development and test environments. And I'm going to be using examples with all of these. So before we actually get into it, I want to actually give you a little bit of context. There was a study done in 2009. I'm sure there's been one done recently, but that's the one that I used when I did this talk. That said 68% of waterfall, this was talking Prince 2 specifically, projects failed on one of 3 criteria. Quality, in terms of features delivered. Budget, was it delivered under budget? And time, was it delivered within the time frame that they said they would? So under those 3 criteria, projects failed. The same study then looked at Agile and looked at Agile failure rates on those same 3 criteria. Understanding that, yes, okay, Agile features change and are developed, but there is still a quality control at the end of a project. A project still ends. Even an Agile project doesn't last forever. So, did it deliver what the customer wanted? Did it deliver in a time frame the customer was happy for? And did it deliver within the budget the customer was happy for paying? And under those 3 criteria, 47% of Agile projects failed. This was in this study. I think they examined, I think it was 100 or thereabouts Agile projects. 47% failed. Now those are statistics you don't hear bandied about. Agile, of course Agile, it always works, it never fails, which is ridiculous, as I'm sure we all know. I'd like to actually have a little poll in this audience. Who here has run an Agile project in the past that has failed? A couple of you, excellent. All right, based on the 3 criteria I gave you, who here has missed one of those criteria? The customer wasn't happy with features, it went longer than the customer wanted, or it went over the customer's budget? Few more hands, good. All right. So my definition of failure is of those 3 criteria. Other people will have different definitions, that's semantics and not really relevant. So, let's get into the autopsy of these projects. The first is the failure of the customer. Okay? Why and how can the customer be instrumental in the non-delivery of what the customer wants? Now, this seems a little bit contradictory because we're writing a project for a customer. Okay? We're doing what the customer wants, so how can they be the cause of failure? Well, some symptoms. Lack of engagement. The customer not really understanding what it means to be Agile for them. They may come from a traditional project background where they give you a scoping document, which may be 100 pages long, but that then turns around and says, well, actually, no, you give us 5 pages and you deal with us every single day, every single week. You tell us what you want, what changes you want. But if they're not going to engage in that level, then your project is at risk. Lack of subject matter experts. Okay? So in projects where you have specific domain knowledge which is required, the customer has that domain knowledge and you don't. If they're not going to provide people to give you the information, well, that's going to cause problems. Last one is poorly managed expectations. And this is a little bit more nebulous in terms of, well, how can we measure this as a cause of failure? And because it's qualitative, not quantitative in nature, it can be difficult, but it's something that you're going to have to do. With expectations management, it is critical that your customer knows what they're getting. Who here was in the cross-cultural distributed teams talk earlier today? A couple of you? There was a very interesting point that Lena raised in that talk, which was about communication and making sure that that direct and indirect communication, making sure that when you say something to the customer, that the customer understands what you mean, exactly what will be delivered, so that their expectations are within the frame of reference. If you say, oh, this might be done by Thursday, okay, what's the customer going to expect? The customer's probably going to expect, oh, what they said was it'll be done by Thursday. Not, well, it might be done or it might not be done. So it's managing those customer expectations, which is quite difficult. So let's actually look at a real case study. In 2009, sorry, I apologize, in 2010, I was brought into the Department of Immigration within Australia. This is an Australian federal government department, to work on a large Agile rollout, as in rolling out the Agile methodology within various business sections within that department. This was a great opportunity. There was executive support. The executive said, we want Agile. We want to be more customer-focused. That's great. We had developer support. The developers went, look, we've failed so many times with this traditional method. We want to try something new. They liked the idea of self-empowered teams. They liked the idea of being able to deliver small increments rather than spending 6 months to deliver something that maybe no one uses. So we had all that going for us. But what we didn't have was a customer. The senior executive who was in charge of this turned around and went, Evan, we need to run a pilot Agile project. Fair enough, I can understand that. Here's the project that you're going to do. That's the first mistake. Here's the project that you're going to do. He had identified a hole, a gap in a business need. Fair enough. But what he hadn't done is talk to the business owner of that information, of those needs. He hadn't talked to them to say, well, actually, hang on a second. If I'm going to do some work for these people, I'm going to deliver what they want, maybe better ask them what they want. So we had the first meeting with this customer who had only been told 2 days beforehand that, oh, we were going to do a project for them. They hadn't given it any thought. They didn't really care one way or another. They were happy with what they had. They went, look, we've got this ad hoc system that gives us all the information. I suppose you can replace that system with a new one using the enterprise architecture, which, okay, well, that was our project. Replace legacy systems. Nothing wrong with that project, but the customer wasn't engaged. The customer didn't care. We tried to get the customer to come into the organization, come into the project team, or at least nominate a representative, a product owner. And eventually, after about 2 weeks, we got them to nominate someone who could dedicate 2 hours a week. 2 hours a week as a product owner. It's like, okay, well, is there someone else who has more? It's like, no, look, we're really busy. It's a busy time. You're just going to have to work with what you've got. It's like, okay, fine, let's try and work in this situation. Now, this was like warning bells have been ringing in my head at this point for the last couple of weeks. How do we fix this? But no, it's an exciting opportunity. You've got to try and get this working. And I didn't do what I should have done. I should have said no. I should have turned around and said, this project is not going to work. What I did, and unfortunately this is one of my particular personal flaws, is I went, look, let's try and accommodate you. Let's try and work with you to give you something. It may not be perfect, but look, I'm sure we can do something. In the end, this project went on for, what are we talking, 6 months or thereabouts? Got to about the middle of, towards about September, October 2010. And these were 2-week iterations, 6 months of 2-week iterations, so 12 iterations or thereabouts. So in those 12 iterations, we had released exactly twice. No one is shocked by this. This is horrible. You should be releasing every iteration, or at least every iteration that you possibly can. But we released twice. And the major cause of this was lack of customer engagement. The customer didn't care. They didn't turn up to half the reviews. Okay? When we said, look, you've got to do user acceptance testing of this, it sat in their backlog for another 2 iterations. So in the end, they would have 3 iterations worth of work to put together user acceptance tests and then we would deploy it. It was rubbish.
The project will going to fail. I am Raghavendra.
Yeah, look,
why to blame Agile when you have such a customer?
I'm not blaming Agile. I'm not saying that every single cause of failure that I'm going to talk about today will cause a waterfall project to fail, or it will cause an Agile project to fail. Agile is not at fault. I'm not blaming Agile, and please don't think I am.
These are like pitfalls to watch for.
These are pitfalls to watch for. These are issues and concerns that will cause an Agile, any project, but in our context, an Agile project to fail. And lack of customer engagement, let me go back, sorry. Lack of customer engagement is actually particularly bad in an Agile context. Because in a waterfall project, as long as they're there to write the scoping document or to sign off on the scoping document at the beginning of that 6-month process, it doesn't really matter that much if they're there the entire time. Like, okay, sure, it's nice for them to go, yes, this milestone is complete, but it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't destroy the project. The Agile project failed, and I will use that word absolutely. The Agile project failed because the customer was not engaged. So this was a specifically Agile, a problem to us. This problem is specific to an Agile project. Okay? But once again, lack of customer engagement in and of itself is not an Agile problem. It could be a problem for any project.
Because the Agile principles were not followed the way it should have been followed. Because one of the key principles in Agile is customer engagement.
Absolutely.
So it's one of the misimplementations which actually failed the project.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, another show of hands. Who here has implemented Agile exactly as it's meant to be implemented by the book? No. Yeah, exactly.
If the customer engagement was not there, then it was not implemented the right way.
Yeah, but that's my point. Yeah. That is exactly my point. Because the customer engagement was not there, okay, we had our Agile project was doomed to failure.
Yeah, sure.
Just to share one experience, it was an in-house project developed by an enterprise, and it was so-called an Agile project, and I was kind of a stakeholder in that project. And that project didn't release for 2 years.
2 years.
I mean, it was not lack of customer engagement,
Yeah.
but I mean, it was an in-house project, and that project didn't release for 2 years. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's actually then look at prevention. What are the warning signs of this? Okay, so first of all, ask yourself, do you have the right product owner? Okay, is your product owner willing to give you 10 hours a week? That's just a ballpark figure, 10 hours a week, a quarter of their working time to work with you on this project, help develop the product backlog, help to review and look at the work that the teams have delivered. If your product owner is not giving you that time, well, you don't have the right one. Ask for a different product owner. Train the product owner into their role. Make them understand what they need to do to deliver. Well, which actually brings me to the next one, customer and product owner training. Sorry, yes? That is actually true. What he said was not about the number of hours, it's being available when the team needs them, which is actually absolutely true. 2 hours is not enough, no matter how much the team is going to need them more than that. Just developing the product backlog alone is quite a substantial task for the product owner. All right. Customer and product owner training. If the customer is unaware of their responsibilities, then don't start the project. Customer and product owner training should be done first. Not done 3 months into the project when you have the budget for the training. It should be before the project starts, make sure they understand their responsibilities.
How do you apply that to a customer that's part of the public domain paying money for your product? Right?
Actually, surprisingly, that's what I do more often than not. Internal customers, yes, you can order them, or the boss can say, you must go do this training. But if you're an Agile shop, if you're saying, look, we are going to do this wonderful project for you, you're going to be in control of the delivery. However, you need to understand what your responsibilities for this are. You're going to pay us $500,000 to develop something? Well, surely you can afford half a day to come and learn what you need to do to make sure that delivers right. And quite often, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm brought into an organization to coach their product owner, to coach their customer in, and I'm talking external ones here, to say, okay, this is what you have to do.
So is there a parallel for mass market production? I mean, if we're making products for people that aren't asking for them.
Okay, now you have the incorrect definition of a customer there. Those are users. Okay? Yes, they're paying. So here's a question. The iPhone. Who is the customer, assuming the iPhone was developed agilely, which it wasn't, but who is the customer for that? And it's not you guys who own iPhones. You are not the customer in an agile sense. It was probably Steve Jobs, to be honest. I don't know who in Apple would have been considered that customer, but somebody is considered, has the ownership, the responsibility for that. And in a retail context, It's generally an internal product owner or product manager.
Program sponsor.
Or a program sponsor or some sort of internal resource. So yeah, customers, retail customers are users, not customers.
Can I just add one important point to this? This is a good list, but I thought it's very important.
Yep.
The first group that needs to be trained in Agile is the senior management, because without their cooperation in Agile, nothing can even start. So that is the first group that needs to be trained in Agile, and that is when, after that, the customer engagement, the product owner training, the Scrum Master training starts. So the first group that needs to be trained is the senior management, because that is where most of the Agile projects fail, because they continue to have the control and command situation.
Senior, as having been a CTO and having been a director of business intelligence and all sorts of fancy titles which sound much more impressive than they actually usually are, absolutely, senior executive are rubbish when it comes to actually understanding what they need to do. And I'll actually be talking about that when I talk about the team. I'll talk about the role of the senior executive in that regards. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say senior executives need to be trained first. It depends on the context in which you're in. Generally, however, in an organization which is doing Agile, the senior executive have bought into the Agile process before you ever go to a customer. So yes, they would normally get trained first, but we're talking it's outside the scope of the project per se. It's sort of at a higher level. Any other question? Oh, the last one, sorry, before I go on. Clear expectations. This goes to what Lini was talking about earlier, which was make sure when you say we will deliver X, that's what you're going to deliver. One thing that I do recommend is have a line in your product backlog, in your iteration backlog. Say, these are the 5 stories that we've assigned to this product backlog. We're going to draw a line about halfway through and say, these are the ones we guarantee, or as best as you possibly can in any sort of project, that we will deliver in these 2 weeks. These last 3 might. We will get to them if we can. You can watch the progress on the burn down chart, but we do not guarantee that we will deliver everything in that iteration backlog. And just drawing that line through that iteration backlog, it changes the mindset of the customer. So instead you're saying, here's the iteration backlog that we will deliver to, here's 2 iteration backlogs, the one that we will deliver and the one that we'll deliver if we have time. Okay? And just those little things about making it very, very clear to the customer in terms of what you're going to deliver it makes all the difference. It really, really does. Anyone have any questions about customer? Yes? Sorry, I missed that. Say again. Yeah, no, so what he asked is, the customer's not going to be happy if you split that backlog. Is that what you're saying? Because the customer is he's not going to get everything. But the fact of the matter is the customer may not get everything. It is better, there's a saying that I always use with my customer, under promise, over deliver. If you over promise and under deliver, then you're going to be considered non-functioning, or at worst non-functioning, at best incompetent, okay, at doing what you do. But if you under-promise and say, we're going to deliver this, but actually deliver just that little bit more, the customers go, hey, these guys are wonderful, they're guns. Like, they're doing more than they said, they're doing it better. And there's heaps of engineering jokes about doing exactly that. But the customer will be happier with clarity and clear expectations. They may not be happier specifically when you tell them. They may actually go, oh, that's a bit disappointing. I was hoping you could do everything. But overall, the customer is going to be much, much happier with your delivery than if you say, oh, we can do everything, but actually do 4 out of 5 stories. That's exactly it. Choosing to make them unhappy now rather than very, very unhappy later.
Expectations, right? I mean, it's always not so negotiable, right? I mean, the customers would want you to do something sometimes. And it's not always in the real world. It's always not so simple as I'll do this and this is not I'll do. Customer will say that this is what I want you to do.
Yep.
What do you do then?
To my customers, I describe a project, the team as a pipeline. Okay, and I generally have a whiteboard and I just draw this up and just say, look, the width of the pipeline is the size of the team. We can push through, we'll pack this pipeline with work. This is our product backlog. You say, if you add something to the front of that list, something's going to fall off the end. Okay? You can't have everything. And that's part of that customer training. The customer has to understand that when you say, and the beauty of Agile is you've got evidence to back you up. You've got this wonderful thing called velocity and burn down charts that you can say, historically, this is how much we can do. You can tell you'll take your business elsewhere as much as you like if we don't deliver all of this that you ask for. But the fact of the matter is, all evidence says this is how much we can do. And we cannot do more unless you're willing to pay us more so we can hire more staff. Sometimes they'll do that, actually. Sometimes they will say, well, actually, this is so critical, bring on a couple more staff for the next 5 iterations. And that can actually work. But you've got to get that understanding up front to the customer in terms of you can't have everything that you want. The customer is not always right. You try and give them what they want, but they can't have everything.
Not just offshore teams or anything like that, what should be delivered, right?
Absolutely. Well, the product owner when the product owner is not the customer, they're a representative of the customer, okay, then they're in an interesting situation because the product owner in that regards is closer aligned to the team than they are to the customer. There's this concept that we have of switching sides. A customer gives you a product owner to say, this is my representative to the project. But after a couple of iterations, the product owner becomes the team's representative to the customer. And that's actually, I think, quite important to that. The product owner is your voice to the customer to manage those expectations. And that's the beauty of a product owner. Yeah. Absolutely. And in fact, that goes exactly to the point I was making earlier. Sorry, if you didn't hear, you're saying it's all about a trust relationship, building that trust relationship with the customer. But going back to the point which you asked, and that is that under-promising, over-delivering. If you say we can do everything and do less than you promise, that managing expectations, you don't build trust, you lose trust. Right? So, customer, this is one source of failure. And I have had more than one project that has failed because the customer wasn't engaged or was unhappy with what was delivered because there was not good communication. Okay. So, number 2, symptom number 2, cause number 2, iteration 0. Okay, sprint 0 if you're a Scrum person. So before I just start rambling on, everyone here understands what iteration or sprint 0 is and what it's for? Yep, good. One of the things that sells Agile is this concept of quick to market. You just start. Now, there is a methodology that doesn't fit under Agile, which says just start hacking. Don't bother with anything. Just start writing something, and eventually you'll get what the customer wants. First of all, that's not, strictly speaking, Agile. If an organization does Agile because they don't want to do documentation, then they're not doing Agile properly. Once again, a lot of the time that I spend with organizations is training them out of bad Agile habits. So documentation is your friend in Agile, but the point is not to do over-documentation. So one of the flaws in an Agile project that will cause or can cause it to fail, and once again, yes, this will work just as well for non-Agile projects as well, is not doing a good or proper iteration 0. Not planning out the scope or the scale of this project. Okay? Three symptoms. One, competing effort between strategic and customer work. What do I mean by that? Let's give you an example. Another situation, I was working with an organization building up their, once again, this was a business intelligence Agile project. Quite large, there were about 30 people on the teams, so we broke that into 4 teams. And overall, look, things on paper were great. We had the right makeup of people. We had good ETLers, interface designers and developers, this is business objects, data architects and analysts, SQL people who could write the database schemas and build the data warehouse. So we had the right mix of people. We had the customer. The customer was fully on board. They gave us the subject matter experts to understand the data. It was brilliant. But what we didn't have was a framework. There's business intelligence and data warehousing is one of those tricky things where you optimize the design for speed. Absolutely. You have redundant data. Any of you who here knows SQL and database design? Yep. Third normal form? Yeah, throw it out the window. Data warehouse design, nothing to do with like that. It's designed for speed. So this is all great, but when you have almost a petabyte of data, fine, you're going to need to be able to put it somewhere. And what they didn't have was any concept of any enterprise-level structure or schema in which to start. So we had a customer, one of the business areas, business intelligence, the customers tends to be internal. So they said, look, we need these series of reports for an annual report. The annual report is due in I think it was like 3 or 4 months. It wasn't onerous. It was a good project. But the teams had to spend half their time building the strategic assets rather than delivering to the customer. So without that iteration 0 plan, and the problem is, we didn't identify us up front. Iteration 0 was great. We went, all right, this is what we'll do, is we'll build these schemas, and we'll put this, populate this information there. But none of the developers stopped and said, well, hang on a second, or actually, we kind of need to build this stuff first before we can deliver anything the customer wants. And unfortunately, what that meant was those 4 months that we were meant to deliver something to the customer, we delivered nothing to the customer because we were still struggling with the baseline systems. Once again, a failed Agile project. Poorly defined project scope. The customer needs to have an understanding of the end goal, the end state. It can change. Absolutely, it can change. But as a project team, you need to understand, well, what are we working towards? I have no idea what that was.
Please have their phones on silent mode.
Anyway, what was I saying? I've completely lost my train of thought. That's the problem with mobile phones. You lose your train of thought. Scope. Project scope. Customer needs to have a clearly defined project scope. They need to know where the project is going to end. Otherwise, you're just going to... The work that you do at the beginning may not be conducive to the work that you'll do at the end. A lot of this comes down to that framework again. If you're building web-based systems, okay? If you know that they want at the end of the day e-commerce as part of their project, and this is actually a real example, though this is a project that succeeded. If you know they need e-commerce, then you can actually build the frameworks and the security in upfront. Okay? You can build that into the framework that you're delivering, into the designs you're building up front. Whereas if they don't tell you that this is the end goal, and you build something which is designed to just handle a much smaller scope, then, well, your design's going to be wrong. Now, yes, we have this wonderful thing called refactoring. We can rebuild. And refactoring is a great thing, but you still want to have enough of a design, enough of a concept of what's going to be delivered at the very, very end so that you can actually build it in the right direction, is my point. The last one is having no success criteria. Now, success criteria are a concept out of the more traditional project management methodologies. In fact, the term success criteria comes out of PMBOK. Okay? So success criteria are the criteria for success. Funny, it kind of makes perfect sense. But what they are is a set of statements or descriptions of this project will succeed, will deliver what I want it to deliver if it does this, this, and this. Now, once again, success criteria can change, but if you do not define them up front, if you do not say in iteration 0, oops, sorry. If you do not say in iteration 0 what those success criteria are, how do you know when to stop? How do you know when you're done? Okay? We have this concept in Agile of the definition of done. What is done? When people say that they're talking about stories. But what I'm talking about is project. When is a project done? Give us a definition of done for the project. It needs to be done in iteration 0, otherwise the project is just going to ramble, much like my talk. Prevention. So, how do we actually stop this from occurring? Okay, first of all, ensure the framework is available early. Okay? If you're building a web-based system, decide, okay, are we going to go Drupal or are we going to do Joomla? If we're building iPhone apps, it's like, okay, are we going to use a particular framework or are we going to build it from scratch? Business intelligence, okay, let's design our master data management structure that's going to store this information. Okay? Are we going to have a service-oriented architecture, or are we just going to do it ad hoc? How is this all going to fit together? If you have this, not necessarily built, not necessarily like completely there, but you have the concept of how the architecture and those frameworks are going to hang together, then you're going to be in a much better position down the track. I'm not saying you can't make wrong decisions. Absolutely, sometimes you'll make wrong decisions. But if you at least make that attempt, you'll be better off more often than not. Does that make sense? Yep. You want to have a clearly defined end state. Okay, this is this success criteria. What is done? And lastly, and this is something that people don't always do in iteration 0, which is odd, because if you're doing Agile or Scrum by the book, you're meant to. And that is put a lot of detail into iterations 1 and 2 in iteration 0. I've worked in organizations who they'll finish iteration 0, okay, and they'll have the product backlog, but it'll all be in low detail. And so when it comes time to do iteration 1 and 2, then the customer's frantically putting in the detail into the first few stories. But what we want is, in iteration 0, to have a plan. A plan that says, we're going to develop these stories, these are the screens, these are the fields, this is what it should look like, this is what it should do, and this is what you'll deliver at the end. You need to have that plan up front. Okay? So, any questions about this one? Yes?
How do you say that building a framework actually delivers business value? Because you might not really need a framework. And, Mike Cohen talks about a traceable approach where you build something from the front to the back. And then you're building a framework.
Yeah, absolutely.
This isn't really a traceable approach.
So, for those of you who didn't hear, why would you build a framework up front? It's not traceable, and it adds minimal business value. So 2 things there. One is, if you don't need a framework, you wouldn't build it. Okay? I don't believe that you should use frameworks just because they're there. You would use them if they are appropriate to the end state, the end goal. Okay? Secondly, however, is if you decide you did need something like a framework, then, or some sort of architecture behind the system, you would not build the entire framework in iterations 1, 2, and 3 and deliver nothing to the customer. You would only deliver those parts of the framework that were relevant to delivery. So you would still do front-to-back design and delivery, but you need to understand that there may be a framework under it that will need to be iteratively expanded upon. Yeah.
Along with the stories, but the architecture will have to be done up. No,
No,
not
no, no,
design.
no, no.
Architecture. Design is different. Design is for a story, but architecture is for the whole program.
I'm talking like a couple of A4 pages, which,
Architecture, design, I'm not saying setting up everything.
yeah,
Architecture, design, architecture, how the architecture should be, that should be up front. You can't actually start creating architecture later. That you can't do.
yeah. So you need to know what you're going to be building from an architectural perspective. And we're not talking design in terms of down to the nuts and bolts. What we're saying is a couple of A4 pages that describe how everything's going to talk together and how there's going to be an interface between elements. That, we're talking half a day's work, and that's Agile. Okay? The other thing, however, is a lot of organizations use off-the-shelf frameworks, which can often actually bootstrap a project beyond that point as well. Or you've pre-developed an in-house framework that you reuse and reuse, okay? And which happens actually more often than not. Building a framework from scratch for a project, you'd have to really sit back and go, the investment in this framework for this project is going to be this amount of man hours, t-shirt size, ballpark figures, whatever you want to do. Is that going to give value to the customer? The framework will never give value, but the savings that a framework can give will give secondary value by making things faster. So that's why you wouldn't necessarily use a framework if it was not necessary.
And that's a very dangerous fact because you're being speculative. And if you're being speculative, you're bound to be wrong somewhere. That way you're money and time.
Absolutely. So, yeah.
I don't know, how can you even think of if you have to build a trading system, how can you build it in pieces?
Okay.
And I'm not saying that you can't, but your entire mindset of what you called an iteration to be able to bring anything to life would be much bigger than few days or weeks, right?
I've done a lot of work in the financial industry as well, and the financial firms that I've worked with tend to have pre-existing frameworks or architecture that all their financial management software sits upon. Generally, it's completely customized, like Goldman & Sachs has a completely weird and customized one that they've built entirely from scratch, and it just boggles the mind the amount of effort and money that they've spent on this. But the point is, hooking new components in, because these are built to be modular, does not add significant, and we're talking a couple of hours per iteration rather than a couple of days per iteration. It does not add significantly more time to development than if they were just doing it from scratch. Now, so without the framework behind it. The advantage, however, is then down the track, once they're 3, 6, 12 months down the track, new stories are significantly faster to bolt on than if they... did you want to say something?
I wanted to move on.
Yeah, I'll move on, and we can have a conversation afterwards. So, the team. Where can the team fall over? Now, sadly, and I have to admit, the team is generally where projects fail. Okay? The team's wonderful things, we try and empower them, we try and make them so that they're all powerful, all knowing, and can do everything, but often doesn't work in practice. So, what are our symptoms? So we're still talking about our autopsy. So one of the causes of death, the team. What are the symptoms? First of all, who here works on projects which are chronically understaffed? Yes, lovely, everybody. That's a risk, absolutely that's a risk, okay? There was a project that I was working on, actually no, sorry, go to the second one, missing specific skills. There's a project I was working on, and there was an organizational chart for this project. We needed these types of people, went to market for as many as we could that the project didn't have, recruited them, but there was one skill set, interface designer, that we could not fill. And generally most customers, what do they see? They see the interface. And so we had all these horrible mock-ups. This was a web-based system, and I tell you, a lot of web developers really aren't very good at designing things. So we had these horrible mock-ups that we'd done that ended up going into production, or at least deployed to the customer for review and final acceptance, that we could not make any better because the skills were not available within the team. And the customer went, no, this looks horrible. I do not want to accept this. I will not accept this. Functionally, it did everything the customer wanted it to do. It was functionally perfect. Okay? It passed the continuous integration environment. All the unit tests were written. The documentation was, we had a technical writer. We had documentation, which is amazing for an IT project in and of itself. But what we didn't have was a good interface designer who could actually make it look good. And that is what the customer wanted. And so this project, the project itself didn't actually fail because we actually did eventually get an interface designer. We actually had to subcontract to another firm to actually do the interface design. They weren't agile, so it was all a bit of a pain. But we did eventually manage to get those interface designs put on and bolted on top of the whole project. But this was a significant risk to delivery. And something that you need to understand, well, do I have all the skills to deliver what the customer wants? And you can't tell the customer, we're ready to go, unless you have all the skills and enough people to deliver. Competing priorities. Now, this is a tough one, especially when your project is internal. So, in your teams, your staff, whose staff spend 100% of their working time on the project? And whose staff spend 80% of their time on the working project and then 20% of their time doing maintenance or working on other systems, doing business tenders, trying to get the next contract, that sort of thing. Okay? Quite a lot of organizations, unfortunately, have these split priorities. And those can detract. Unless your plan, as in the iteration plan, goes, well, this guy here, Joe, well, he's going to be working on this project 50% of the time for the next 2 weeks because he's going to go and write a tender. Unless you're good enough to actually go, well, actually, hang on a second, look, you're now spending a lot more than 50% of the time on this tender. Yes, it's important, but we told the customer we're going to deliver these set of features, and you're holding up the rest of the team. You've got to keep those competing priorities under control. And sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes, yes, that's more important. Sometimes people go off sick and you can't deliver. But that's where the whole under-promising, over-delivering comes in. You don't tell them you can do everything. You tell them you can do, this is guaranteed and this is possible. So if someone does get sick or gets pulled off to write a tender, well, okay, we can still deliver enough that the customer's happy. Low team morale. Now, there's a saying which I use a lot, which is success breeds success. Okay? If you have a successful team, you have a happy team. You have a team that is content with what they're doing. What you don't have is, if you have a team that is failing, just making sure my time is almost up. If you have a team that is failing, then that team is going to have low morale. And that, unfortunately, is going to drag the rest of the project down with it. The project may be going perfectly, but they've just had these issues that they're trying to deal with in terms of previous projects. And okay, yes, well, this one's going fine, but unless you can actually build it up, it's not going to work. So prevention. First of all, recruit for an agile team. Don't just recruit, he's a software developer, great. Go, well, you're a software developer, but can you work in an agile environment? Yes, no. If the answer is no, don't hire them. So your recruitment strategy changes from do they have the skills to do they have the skills and do they have the personality. Focus on developing the team empowerment. The team needs to be empowered to do the work. And if your teams aren't, then, well, A, you're not agile, and B, it's going to fail. And if you have if you have missing skills in your team, then tell the customer, oh, we can't do that for you. Don't say, oh, look, we'll make an attempt at an interface. Say, look, we're going to focus for the next 2 iterations on back-end infrastructure, the administration screens. Yes, it's low on your priority list, but we don't have the skills to do what's on the top of your priority list. So actually work with the customer, engage with the customer to go, these are the skills, this is what we can do well for you. The rest of it, yes, it's high priority, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. Infrastructure. Okay, and the last 2 I can get through fairly quickly because they're very similar. Okay, underdeveloped baseline architecture. Already spoken a lot about that, so I won't go into detail. Missing documentation. Oh, this is a pain that I'm sure all of us have felt quite often. Okay? If your underlying infrastructure that does not have the sufficient information to actually, for your teams to deliver, then you're in trouble. Unstable upstream systems and data. This is important in things like business intelligence, any sort of server-based environment. If what your project sits on or utilizes is unstable, then you are compromising your delivery. You'll tell the customer, oh, we'll give you this information or we'll build you this functionality. But for no fault of your own, an upstream system or an upstream information causes you to fail that delivery. Does the customer care that it was the upstream system? No. The customer cares that you didn't deliver what you said you would. So you need to make sure those upstream systems are stable. This is all fairly straightforward stuff, so I won't go into that. Last one, dev and test environments. So, who here has a wonderful development environment and a wonderful test environment that does everything that they want it to do? Nobody! What a surprise. I tend to recommend that developers control their own development environment. I've worked in organizations where the developers, it's like, this is your dev environment, this is what you work on. And the developer goes, look, I prefer this IDE over Eclipse, or I prefer to write my, to do profiling using this tool. Let them actually build their own dev environment. Okay? Give them that control. Likewise, testing, automated testing, JUnit is not necessarily always enough. Okay? Look at automated profiling tools. Look at debuggers and things that check for memory leaks, beyond just your JUnit and cruise control. All right? So actually build up the framework of your test suite framework beyond just what you may have now. And that will help you identify issues. All right? In a business intelligence context, and I'll use this as an example because this was just last year, as in literally in December, we deployed a system. We had a 10% test environment with 10% of the production data size. Worked fine. We could run the reports and produce the features that the customer wanted in about 1/3 of a second. We pushed that to production, thinking, oh, it'll take like maybe, or let's scale it out. Oh, it will take maybe 2 or 3 seconds. That's acceptable. No, it took 30 minutes. And that was unacceptable. The customer didn't want that. It actually brought the whole system grinding to a halt while it was trying to process this data. We thought, well, hang on, no, this doesn't make sense, but it does. It was an n to the 4, I think, complexity problem in terms of like really, really exponentially difficult as data got big. So it exponentially got slower. So if we had had proper profiling tools, we could have actually picked that up earlier. Okay? Now, this wasn't a failed project, this was a failed iteration, but still the customer wasn't very happy with us. The senior executive weren't happy with us, so it was something that we had to move on. All right. Actually, I've already just, I've just answered those same questions. Sorry I had to run through the last bit in a bit quickly. I got bogged down in a couple of questions. So, yep. Well, you're looking for personality, and I can't tell you the answer to that. What you need, I don't mean you want to recruit someone who has done Agile before. That's not the right approach. But you need to go, does this person have the ability to cope with change? Do they have the ability to work in a collaborative environment with the team I currently have? And it will change from team to team. You'll have one team that has a set of personality traits and a second team with a different set of personality traits. You're actually you're recruiting for a team, not for a project. And I can't give you an answer to that because it's up to you. Anyone else? Someone over there? No? All right, thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, they can email me. I'll put the link to these slides up on Twitter and wherever else I can find to upload them. Otherwise, feel free to email me or come and talk to me afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan.